$80. That's a lot for a game. I know it's typically not what Nintendo charges. And then we look at the Donkey Kong game that's coming out about a month later. It's $70.
Yeah, I would say that we're not really looking to establish a benchmark for pricing. We look at every game and every experience and determine what we believe is the right price point based on that experience. So we believe, based on the depth and breadth of the play and the repeatability of the play over time, the pricing that we announced is the right pricing.
Let's talk about the variable pricing. Alright, so the Nintendo Switch 2 has been out for 8 months now. We've gotten something like 15 or 16 games to work with. Some of them are just Switch 2 exclusives, others are Switch 2 editions. Some of them might be pack-in title quality, while others are basically DLC. The point is, there's a wide range of different types of games to work with and a bunch of different prices. I think it makes the most sense to go into the release order, so we'll start with the launch titles. You obviously have Mario Kart World. This is the game that kind of broke the internet. Not because of its quality, not even because of the franchise's reputation, strictly because of the fact that it was the first title to really be pushed into the mainstream as an $80 video game. This is more or less what started the whole conversation in the first place. Nintendo announced that Mario Kart World would be $80, and by announced I mean they put the price on their website without telling anybody it would be $80. And then when Nintendo was questioned about it, Doug Bowser insisted that they put quality and effort into their games and they think that they're worth $80 because of how much effort they put into it. Which, obviously, 8 months later, we realize that's absolutely bull, just given the number of games that are priced at $70, even though there is not $70 worth of effort put into these titles. Alongside Mario Kart World, you also had Welcome Tour. This game was titled $10. I think I'm doing an injustice to the entire gaming community by referring to it as a game. For all intents and purposes, it is nothing more than an instructions manual. In fact, when this game was revealed, the headlines read, Switch 2's paid tutorial Welcome Tour almost made a player fall asleep at a Nintendo event. So that should kind of tell you all that this thing is worth. Most people expected that this would just be something included with the Switch 2. I think it has a little bit of Nintendo charm that could make it fun to screw around with if you do buy a new console, but definitely the fact that Nintendo tried to push this as a $10 value, in addition to the $80 Mario Kart, kind of ignited the flame of the backlash in the first place against Nintendo, where the drop the price movement started to take off. And then of course, in addition to that, Nintendo tried to squeeze in a $70 and an $80 port of the Switch 1 Zelda titles. This is Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, titled as Switch 2 editions. You still have people defending Switch 2 edition games to this day, but the reality is that you're not getting the Switch 2 game without buying that additional pack-in stuff. These are $80 and $70 ports respectively, because you cannot play the Switch 2 versions of these games without spending the additional money. Now, in fairness, there is an upgrade path for people that already bought these titles on the Switch 1, as well as an exclusive offer only for these two Zelda titles. You don't have to pay for that upgrade if you're already paying for Nintendo Switch Online, but no matter how you try to spin it, and no matter which loops you can jump through in order to try to make it a better financial experience for yourself, when the average person is going to the store and they're trying to buy Nintendo Switch 2 games, they're paying $70 or $80 for the Switch 2 ports of Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. So basically, from the day one titles, we have the $80 Mario Kart, the $80 Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, the $70 Breath of the Wild, and the $10 Welcome Tour. Fast forward to July 17th, you get Donkey Kong Bonanza. Naturally, it's another $70 title. Most people, I think, agree that no game is worth $70, but it seems to be the common consensus that if there was one game that might be worth $70 from the Switch 2 exclusive titles, it is Donkey Kong Bonanza. And I think I kind of align with the opinion that no game should be $70, but I'm open to having a discussion about Donkey Kong Bonanza or games of that caliber. But still, as far as Nintendo's variable pricing is concerned, it's just another game that's priced at $70. After Bonanza, we got the first $80 Mario Party game, titled Super Mario Party Jamboree Switch 2 Edition plus Jamboree TV. It's a similar concept to the other Switch 2 Edition titles. You cannot experience the Switch 2 version of Mario Party Jamboree without having the upgrade pack. So therefore, it's not DLC as much as it's additional content when you buy the Switch 2 port of Mario Party Jamboree. Now, the funny thing is, at its core, the only thing the Switch 2 version of Mario Party Jamboree's base game actually offers is just an upres when you're playing handheld on the Switch 2, so it's in 1080p versus 720p. But still, you don't get that up-res unless you buy the Switch 2 edition of Mario Party Jamboree. And as with the other Switch 2 edition titles, there is an upgrade path. But if somebody's going to the store and they want to buy Mario Party Jamboree for the Nintendo Switch 2, their price tag is very clearly in front of their face at $80. And the conversation continues with Kirby and the Forgotten Land Switch 2 edition plus Star-Crossed World. Either you can pay the full $60, which is the same price that it launched at the Switch 1, and it's currently still that same price on the Switch 1, but if you only pay the $60, you only get a Switch 1 game, which means you're playing Kirby and the Forgotten Land at 30 frames per second. If you would like to play the Switch 2 version of Kirby and the Forgotten Land, which means you're playing it up-resed and at a higher frame rate, which I believe locks it at 60 frames per second, if you want that experience, which is what you would want if you bought a Switch 2, it means you automatically have to buy Star-Crossed World with it. Therefore, Star-Crossed World is not paid DLC, it is just added content when you decide to upgrade. And you can obviously only upgrade if you already own the game, but if you don't own the game and you go to the store and you want to buy Kirby and the Forgotten Land for the Nintendo Switch 2, the price is once again right in front of your face at $80. Next up would be Drag X Drive. I guess technically this came out a couple weeks before Kirby. You'll have to forgive me for forgetting about it, but in fairness, I think most people have forgotten about this one. Okay, so this title is unique in that it is only $20. But what it's not unique is that it is overpriced, which is the standard for Nintendo games, specifically Nintendo Switch 2 games. I have a complicated relation with this game. Back when they had an open playtest, I think it was like for one weekend before the game came out, we were having a game night and one of my friends had a Switch 2, so we ended up downloading it and trying it out. The gimmick behind using the Joy-Cons to play the game was fun-ish. Like, it felt like there was something there, but they just didn't quite refine it to the extent that they should. I actually think I made a video about this, calling it an excellent idea and a terrible execution, or something along those lines. Because I do genuinely enjoy it when Nintendo tries out these funky things. But you can tell they kind of just phoned it in while making this title. And I mean, that's probably why they only gave it a $20 price tag, because if they put in any more effort, then you're looking at a $70 title. And I'm guessing they're thinking if this is like the Switch 2 version of ARMS and ARMS didn't sell as well as they had liked on the Switch 1, then they naturally just like watered it down as much as humanly possible and shipped it out for $20. Similar to Welcome Tour, I don't understand how they could charge for this game, but I think in a previous generation what Nintendo would have done was this would have had Mii's instead of these gray placeholder beings, and the game just would have been included with Nintendo Switch Online. I think at that value, you can have a discussion that this could be a fun way to kill 30 minutes if you're really bored and you don't know what to play. But other than that, I think this might be the most dead on arrival game out of the entirety of the Nintendo Switch 2 library right now. Probably even more than Welcome Tour. Of course, I'm only talking about the first-party titles, because most people are not playing third-party games on the Switch 2 anyway. So from a first-party angle, Drag X Drive is probably the most dead on arrival game in the entire console. For now, anyway. After that is technically a Switch 1 game, but we got Mario Galaxy 1 and 2. This release was only the second time a Switch 1 game had been priced $70, after Tears of the Kingdom, of course. I might have to dig a little bit deeper into this, but I'm pretty sure the last quarterly showed that Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 had the slowest launch out of any 3D Mario game that was ever released, and that's including all of the previous remakes and re-releases. The only exception might be Mario 3D World on the Wii U, but when you consider the install base of the Wii U with what 3D World was able to sell versus the install base of the Switch 1 and the Switch 2 and what Galaxy 1 and 2 was able to sell as a combo pack, I think it's much easier to view Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 as the underperforming title in this case. Now, of course, Nintendo still made a killing off of this combo because I don't think they had to pay anything to get these games out there. Or not much anyway. You're looking at more of a dolphin quality experience rather than some of the larger remasters that they did for older titles from the Wii. But obviously the fact that Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 was forced to be combined together if you wanted to buy a physical version, the fact that they decided to sell a Switch 1 game for $70, the fact that many people already owned Galaxy 1 in the first place, and obviously the fact that so many people right now are very disgusted with Nintendo's ridiculous prices and general business practices, have all helped to ensure that Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 has one of the worst performing launch quarters for any 3D Mario release in history. And I think it's important to note that because a lot of people are talking about how high these games were ranking both on the Amazon bestsellers list as well as the Nintendo eShop after it launched, as a good reminder that comparing a game to what's being sold around it at the same time is not a clear indication of how successful it'll be in comparison to some of the previous releases in the same franchise. but I think I will do a further analysis on how well or poorly this launch actually went for Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 as we get closer to the Mario Galaxy movie, just because I think it'll be a lot more festive and topical then. And also because I'm still kind of holding out to see if we're going to be getting a new 3D Mario announced before I make that video, but we'll worry about that when we get to it. As it stands, Super Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 purchased at retail is still another $70 game. Very variable indeed. After that, you have Pokemon Legends ZA, $70. The most expensive Pokemon game in history. It included $30 day one DLC as well, so a lot of people spent $100 on this one. And even more if they decided to get Nintendo Switch Online so that they can get the additional features locked behind that. Similar to Super Mario Galaxy, it's also considered a success, but it's also had the worst launch in comparison to every previous Pokemon game since, I think, Let's Go Eevee. I know it definitely did worse than Legends Arceus, and that's despite the fact that Legends Arceus was launched in January after Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl had come out before it, and then Scarlet and Violet had come out after it. Whereas Pokemon Legends ZA was included as a pack-in title for Nintendo's next new big hot console. So that $70 price tag really didn't help its case for the Nintendo Switch 2 version, and as a matter of fact, since the Switch 2 version of this title was actually bundled with the Nintendo Switch 2 consoles, even the help that it should have gotten with being bundled in for $50, as well as the fact that the Nintendo Switch 1 version was at $60 on the largest Nintendo Switch user base that any Pokemon game has ever launched at, I'd say it realistically underperformed in comparison to what Nintendo and Game Freak had expected. But of course, there is no denying that this game still is a resounding success because it's Pokemon, and it made a crap ton of money while costing Nintendo and Game Freak close to nothing to make. They spent more money on the Super Bowl ad that they did the other day. Fast forward, you have Kirby Air Riders. If games were priced based off of effort, then maybe this one might be worth $70. Although in saying that, I haven't actually played this one, I just know that Sakurai tends to throw his entire life into the games that he makes. But at the end of the day, you're looking at a niche racer that's a sequel to a game that came out like 20 years ago that had a very small cult following. And it's coming out on the same year that you get a Mario Kart World game that's packed in with most people's Switch 2, and it's a Kirby spin-off, and Kirby is overwhelmingly more popular in Japan than he is in the West, and the sales of this game are reflecting that. This is the kind of game that I think would have flourished at $40 or $50, but at $70, it's a very tough sell. And what makes it even tougher, obviously, is the fact that Nintendo does not lower the prices of their software, so it's not even like you can just wait a bit and then this game is going to be $50 in a few years. Definitely should not be $70. I don't care how many people love this game, but that does not mean that it's a bad game. I mean, just based off of the reviews, it's mid. But at $70, you expect better than mid. After that, you have Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, once again, $70. Okay, look, so the game as a Metroid title, I don't think delivered, especially as the Metroid Prime 4 game, the one that people have been clamoring for almost, 2 decades at this point. And it had the major moment where there was nothing but a title card shown at the Switch 1 reveal, and then it finally comes out right after the Switch 2 launches. Obviously got put into development hell. There's just a whole lot of issues that happen with this one. I kind of line up with Donkey Kong on this one in that I don't think any game should be $70. But if we were living in a world where Nintendo was actually following variable pricing, and the console had launched and the only 3 games that were priced at $70 were Mario Kart World, Donkey Kong Bonanza, and then Metroid Prime 4 because they were considered the big flagship Nintendo titles for the year of 2025. I guess I forgot about Hyrule Warriors as well. We can include that in this group as well. I'm not going to give that one a whole deep discussion. But if those were the games that were considered the flagship titles and they were $70 and then everything else was actually priced accordingly between $40 and $60, I think I would understand the discussion behind Metroid Prime 4 being a $70 game. But as it stands, it's just another mid game with a $70 price tag, and it just does not justify it. Along with Pokemon, this was a cross-gen release, so they also had Switch 1 games that came out at the same time, and those were priced at $60. It almost sounds crazy to say this, but I appreciate that they decided to go with the $60 and $70 price tags instead of the $70 and $80 price tags. Because that was my fear last summer. I think I said that in a few videos. I was like, what if they decide to come out and charge $70 for Pokemon and Metroid, and then now their Switch 2 edition is $80? But instead, the only Switch 1 game that released at $70 was Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 so far. That should also show how little faith I have in Nintendo right now, too, that I am relieved that they only charge $60 and $70 for their new game, which is absurd to say out loud. Anyway, after that, you do get something kind of unique in Animal Crossing. The game is sold at $65. So here's the thing with this one. The only reason this one is $65 instead of $60 is because the Switch 1 version is still $60. The additional stuff that's added into the Switch 2 edition of New Horizons is kind of meaningless. Everything that's like new about this game was added into the Switch 1 version as well. Like there's a resolution bump, but no performance bump, but it's Animal Crossing. I don't think you need either a resolution or a performance bump. And then if you happen to have 12 friends who also own Nintendo Switch 2s and also decided to upgrade into the new Animal Crossing Switch 2 edition, then you could play up to 12 players multiplayer. But I think it's very clear that Animal Crossing probably offers the least amount if you decide to opt for the Switch 2 edition versus the Switch 1 edition, and I think that is actually reflected in the price. The only reason this game is $65 is because Nintendo's like, well, we can't charge the same price for the Switch 2 edition that we did for the Switch 1 edition. But it's variable. It's a $65 Switch 2 game. I think it's the cheapest Switch 2 game that's not, Welcome Tour and Drag X Drive, technically. But this definitely feels like the exception and not the norm. Fast forward a bit, we get the most recent Switch 2 first-party release in Mario Tennis Fever. That kind of prompted this discussion that I'm having in the first place. I've already made quite a few videos about Mario Tennis Fever. I think we're at 3 now. Most people tend to agree that this is a good game, but it's definitely not $70 of value. You'd be hard-pressed to even argue that it's $70 of effort, like Kirby Air Riders, for example. There's a ton that's reused here, not only from the Mario Tennis Aces on the Switch 1, but also from the Wii U game. And I think seeing as this game was an early 2026 title, it was the first Switch 2 game to be released, exclusive Switch 2 game to be released since, I think, Kirby. It would have been a good chance for Nintendo to really stamp what variable pricing means for a lot of people and price this one at like $50. Maybe even 60, just to kind of show something. But I think it's very clear that with this most recent release, we're all understanding what variable pricing effectively means. You're either paying $80 or $70, and everything that's not one of those two prices is basically an exception. And of course, likewise with the Switch 1, it's going to continue on with the variable pricing of that. Every Switch 1 game is still going to be released at $60, making Tomodachi Life, a sequel to the 3DS game, still a fully priced last-gen low-budget title at $60. But there will still be some exceptions with the Switch 1 games like we saw with Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, where it's $70 instead. But the next game, I would say, is probably the worst of it. Well, actually first, before I discuss Pokemon Pokopia, Super Mario Bros. Wonder is coming out. I've already kind of made a video about this game as well. It's $80. It has all of the same issues that I've already discussed in every other Switch 2 edition game. This is effectively an $80 Switch 1 port with additional content on it. You will not get the resolution bump if you do not buy the Switch 2 version of the game, but the frame rate is going to still be 60 frames per second, which is bizarre because they initially advertised the Nintendo Switch 2 as supporting 120 frames per second by having the Mario model run across the screen. So that kind of threw everybody off. But the long and short of it, that this is the first 2D Mario game that's going to be priced at $80, and it is a port of the last gen game, and it's just another $80 Switch 2 game. Now, Pokemon Pokopia is coming out in early March. It's currently getting a lot of praise, but it also has a lot of that stench that you usually smell whenever there's a game that's being pushed out to influencers and journalists, with some kind of incentives that are either financial or material. They are really trying to push this title. The last time I felt like there was this much of a marketing push for a game that was releasing on the Nintendo Switch 2 was when Ubisoft was really trying to push Star Wars Outlaws. And I think the Pokemon company is trying to do the same thing here. They obviously have the money for it, just like Ubisoft did. Now, I'm guessing this is going to be a good game for the type of crowd that enjoys these titles. I'm not one of them, I'm not of the target audience for this, so I can't really speak much of it. But I mean, if you look at this title at face value and you think about every $70 game out there, this just doesn't make too much sense. I won't spend too much time talking about that. I've already made a video on this, and I'd rather wait until like reviews actually start coming out instead of just previews that are based off of the 1 hour of experience that people have had. But something that I did not discuss previously is the fact that this is the first game that's going to be a game keycard and priced at $70. We've already discussed the fact that it's a first-party game that's $70. I think that alone is one of the scariest things people have noticed, because this is clearly going to be a gateway into more first-party games using a game keycard so Nintendo can cut costs, in the same way that the third-party games were a gateway so that this game could be a game keycard. But like I said, the other issue that this game provides is the fact that it is priced at $70. I remember that was one of the very big talking points about the game keycards, was that third-party developers were probably going to be using game keycards, and that would also allow them to keep the prices of their games a little bit lower. As with most of these discussions, the source is never from anybody, official. It's not coming from Nintendo that said, hey, we're going to use the game keycard so prices can stay down. No, most of these defenses are run by the Nintendo fandom. The Switch 2 defenders that use these things as counter-arguments when people suggest that game keycards are terrible. And so that was a big point early on, was well, obviously people are going to use game keycards because it makes the games cheaper. Would you rather spend more money on the games? But obviously, all of these rules are not set in place. Game keycards are also now for first parties, and they're also now for $70 games. Pokemon Pokopia has ensured that. So genuinely, at face value, I don't expect this game to be worthy of the $70 price tag. I'll wait for the game to come out and to see other reviews to maybe have a discussion, but I highly doubt it. Pokemon games don't exactly have a good track record. And even beyond that, the fact that it is a game keycard for a physical release further stamps my opinion on that. And actually, I think even if you open the door for the third-party games and what they're priced at, I could be mistaken, but I think the only game keycards that actually hit that $70 price tag are the 2K games and the sports titles. WWE, NBA, Madden, FIFA. And I'm pretty sure some of those are technically a code in the box and not even a game keycard. But yeah, Pokemon Pokopia is clearly a very low budget game. It's being charged $70 and it's being sold at a game keycard. It probably sets the worst precedent for that reason alone, but amplify that to the fact that it is Pokemon and it is a first party game. So this is going to be normalizing this for pretty much every other developer to jump in and do what they please. Charge as much as they want and throw those games on game keycards. The success of Pokemon Pokopia could very much destroy the future physical game collection for all Nintendo platforms. So it'll be very interesting to see how well this game does at launch. But at the end of the day, it is just another $70 game for the Nintendo Switch 2. And I think we have a very clear idea of what Nintendo meant and what Doug Bowser specifically meant when he talked about variable pricing back when the Switch 2 was revealed. The console has been out for 8 months now, and we know very clearly the general rule of thumb is that every single game that's going to be released on the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be variable between $70 or $80. There will be some very minor exceptions like Animal Crossing, for example, and some probably even rarer exceptions like Welcome Tour and Drag X Drive. But I think it's safe to assume that every single game that's going to be coming out on the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be $70 or $80. It all depends on how they package it. And likewise with the Nintendo Switch 1, it's mostly going to still just be $60 for last-gen games, even if they're low-budget titles. And there might be a few exceptions where if they can get away with it, they'll charge $70, like they did with Mario Galaxy 1 and 2. And of course, the overarching rule that's going to stand on all of this, and it's not going to change because it hasn't changed in the past 8 years, is that these games are not going to go down in price. They're going to stay at the launch price for the entire duration of this console lifecycle. And as the patterns indicate, that will continue on into the next generation as well. So there's your variable pricing. For the Nintendo Switch 2 specifically, it means that you're paying either $70 or $80, with some minor exceptions. Nintendo is clearly no longer the family-friendly budget company that it once was.